poignant moment when you walked off the court to a standing ovation and you put your hand over your heart. What was going through your head in that moment?
First of all, I'm from Compton, California, and I remember playing on these courts and, my life was great. I never felt like I needed anything. For me,
Serena Williams just dropped a bombshell. I've never seen a tournament this bad. The Australian Open scandal that has tennis in total chaos. Hold on to your seats, tennis fanatics, because the Queen herself has entered the arena, and she is absolutely fuming. If you thought Coco Gauff's devastating quarterfinal crash at the 2026 Australian Open was just another unfortunate loss, you need to think again. According to the greatest of all time, the incomparable Serena Williams, something sinister is brewing beneath the surface in Melbourne, and it goes way beyond a simple match defeat. When Coco walked off that court in tears, the scoreboard told one story, but Serena Williams saw something completely different. She saw a broken system, an exploited athlete, and a tournament that has completely lost its way. In a blistering display of solidarity that sent shockwaves rippling through the entire tennis establishment, Serena unleashed a 10-word warning that has forced everyone from the WTA to casual fans to stop in their tracks and confront an uncomfortable truth. Are we protecting our tennis stars, or are we feeding them to the wolves for entertainment? From invasive cameras lurking in supposedly private corridors to whispers of systematic mistreatment, we're about to rip the veil off the controversy that has the entire sporting world buzzing. What exactly did Serena say that caused such an uproar? Why is the Australian Open suddenly under siege from critics? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of women's tennis? You're tuned into Champions Tennisistics, and we're diving headfirst into the most explosive tennis drama of 2026. Let's rewind the clock to the moment that shattered expectations and broke hearts across the tennis world. Rod Laver Arena, the cathedral of Australian tennis, was packed to the rafters with fans expecting a classic quarterfinal showdown. Coco Gauff, America's golden girl and one of the brightest young stars the sport has ever seen, was squaring off against the battle-tested Ukrainian warrior Elena Svitolina. The stage was set for an epic encounter, a clash of generations and styles that promised fireworks and drama. But what unfolded over the next 73 minutes was nothing short of a catastrophe. 6-1 in the first set, 6-2 in the second, a combined scoreline of 12-3. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an annihilation, a complete and utter dismantling of one of the tour's most talented players. Coco looked lost from the opening point, her usually razor-sharp movement sluggish, her powerful ground strokes misfiring wildly, her mental fortitude completely absent. Now, credit where credit is due, Elena Svitolina played absolutely brilliant tennis, executing her game plan to perfection and never giving Gauff a moment to breathe. But anyone who has watched Coco throughout her young career knows that what we witnessed on that court was not normal. This wasn't the confident, aggressive competitor who has taken down multiple Grand Slam champions. This was a shell of that player, someone clearly affected by forces beyond just her opponent's superior play on the day. The tennis world expected the story to end there. A tough loss, a learning experience, shake it off and move on to the next tournament. Champions lose sometimes, that's part of the game. But what happened next transformed a sporting defeat into an international incident that has exposed the dark underbelly of modern professional tennis. The moment Coco walked off that court, her head down and her spirit crushed, she wanted nothing more than to disappear. After the mandatory handshake and the obligatory wave to the crowd, she ducked into the tunnel leading away from Rod Laver Arena, seeking the one thing any human being deserves after a humiliating public failure: privacy. This narrow corridor, these backstage passageways, they're supposed to be the sanctuary. The sacred space where the mask can come off, where the emotions can flow freely, where an athlete can be vulnerable without the whole world watching and judging. It's the unwritten contract between player and tournament, the understanding that once you leave the arena, you're off limits until you're ready to face the cameras again. Believing she had finally found that refuge, Coco let the dam break. The frustration, the disappointment, the anger at herself for not performing when it mattered most. It all came pouring out in one cathartic moment. She grabbed her racket and smashed it against the concrete wall with all the force her exhausted body could muster. The carbon fiber frame exploded into pieces. It was raw. It was real. It was human. It was the kind of private moment of anguish that every athlete, every competitor, every person who has ever failed at something important can relate to on a fundamental level. But here's the problem. Here's where this story takes its darkest turn. Coco Gauff was not alone. The Australian Open, in their infinite wisdom and their insatiable hunger for content, had installed cameras everywhere. And I mean everywhere. These weren't security cameras quietly recording for safety purposes. These were high-definition broadcast cameras, connected directly to the world feed, streaming Coco's most vulnerable moment to millions of viewers across the globe. They captured every angle of her breakdown, every anguished expression on her face, every violent swing of that racket against the wall. They packaged her pain, wrapped it up with dramatic music and slow-motion replays, and served it to the audience as premium entertainment. The violation was immediate and obvious. Coco felt it in her bones. When she finally made it to her press conference, still reeling from the emotional whiplash of the last hour, she didn't mince words. Her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion, she addressed the elephant in the room head-on. The young champion explained how she had specifically sought out what she believed to be a private area, somewhere away from the cameras and the crowds, just to have a moment to process what had happened. But at this tournament, she revealed, there was no such place. The only true sanctuary left was the locker room itself. Every hallway, every tunnel, every corner had been turned into a potential content opportunity, with cameras lurking around every bend ready to capture and broadcast whatever happened. The media reaction was swift and predictably divided. One camp saw this for what it was, a gross invasion of privacy and a troubling sign of how far tournaments will go in pursuit of dramatic footage. But another, louder segment of the tennis commentariat smelled blood in the water. They pounced on Coco's racket-breaking incident with glee, labeling her as petulant, immature, and unprofessional. Former players who should have known better lined up to criticize her emotional response, conveniently forgetting their own on-court meltdowns during their playing days. Social media trolls had a field day, mocking her for caring too much, for not being able to handle the pressure, for showing weakness. The pylon was vicious, relentless, and completely missing the point. That's when the cavalry arrived. That's when the greatest female tennis player in history decided she had seen enough. That's when Serena Williams stepped into the fray and changed everything. Now, understand something about Serena Williams. In her retirement, she has been selective about when and how she uses her platform. She's not out here commenting on every match result or every minor controversy. When Serena speaks, it's because something has genuinely moved her, genuinely angered her, or genuinely threatened something she holds dear. And watching the tennis establishment and the media mob tear into Coco Gauff for having the audacity to display human emotion, that crossed the line. Serena took to social media with a post that was characteristically brief but devastatingly effective. She didn't write an essay. She didn't need to. The woman who has faced down more criticism, more unfair treatment, more double standards than perhaps any athlete in history knew exactly what to say to cut through the noise. Her message was simple, direct, and absolutely perfect. She wrote about passion, about caring, about how much it matters to these athletes. She made it crystal clear that there is absolutely nothing wrong with hating to lose, with being angry at yourself for not meeting your own standards. In 10 powerful words, actually 9, but who's counting? Serena validated Coco's feelings, defended her right to be upset, and called out everyone who was using this incident to attack a young woman's character. But Serena didn't stop there. Oh no, because this is Serena Williams we're talking about, and subtlety has never been her strong suit when she's defending what's right. She followed up that initial post with a vintage Serena touch that had tennis fans everywhere both laughing and cheering. With her signature blend of humor and edge, she offered to give Coco some lessons on the proper technique for racket smashing. After all, if you're going to break a racket, you might as well do it with style. It was a perfect encapsulation of Serena's entire message. Stop treating these athletes like robots. Let them feel. Let them be human. And for heaven's sake, stop judging them for caring about their craft. The impact of Serena's intervention was nothing short of seismic. Within hours, the entire narrative surrounding Coco's Australian Open exit had completely flipped. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer about whether Coco had acted inappropriately. Instead, people were asking the hard questions that should have been asked from the beginning. Why does the Australian Open have cameras in areas that players reasonably expect to be private? Who made the decision to broadcast that footage? What responsibility do tournaments have to protect player mental health and well-being? And most fundamentally, when did we decide that athletes owe us access to every single moment of their lives, even their darkest and most vulnerable ones? This is where we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because Serena's defense of Coco isn't just about one racket-breaking incident or one invasive camera. It's about a systematic problem that has been building in professional tennis for years. The sport, like so many others in the social media age, has become obsessed with content creation. Tournaments compete with each other not just on prize money and playing conditions, but on their ability to generate viral moments, behind-the-scenes footage, and intimate access to the players. The Australian Open has been particularly aggressive in this regard, pioneering technologies and camera placements that capture angles and moments. On the surface, this seems great for fans. Who doesn't want more access to their favorite players? Who doesn't want to see what happens behind the curtain? But there's a dark side to this arms race for content, and it's the erosion of any boundary between public performance and private humanity. When players are essentially under surveillance from the moment they arrive at the tournament until the moment they leave, when there is literally no space where they can let their guard down without potentially ending up on television, that creates a psychological pressure cooker that absolutely affects performance and mental health. Think about what we're asking of these athletes. They're already dealing with the immense pressure of competing at the highest level, where one bad day can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars and tank your ranking. They're managing injuries, travel fatigue, and the constant grind of a tour that never really stops. They're navigating media obligations, sponsor commitments, and the expectations of millions of fans. And on top of all that, we're now telling them that even in their moments of greatest pain and frustration, they need to maintain composure because the cameras are always rolling. It's inhuman. It's unsustainable. And Serena Williams, who spent 2 decades navigating this pressure while also dealing with racism and sexism that most of her peers never faced, recognized exactly what was happening to Coco. When Serena talks about unfair treatment and arrangements, she's speaking from a place of hard-earned wisdom. She's seen how tournaments can create conditions that disadvantage certain players, whether through scheduling, court assignments, or in this case, invasive surveillance. She's experienced firsthand how the media and public will hold women to different standards than men, criticizing them for showing emotion while celebrating male players for the exact same passion and fire. And she's fought those battles, often alone, for the better part of her career. So when she sees a talented young black woman being vilified for caring too much, for being too emotional, for not fitting neatly into the box that society wants to put female athletes in, she recognizes the pattern immediately. The response to Serena's stance was overwhelming and almost unanimously positive. Current players from across the WTA Tour started speaking up, many of them for the first time, about their own experiences with the increasingly invasive nature of tournament coverage. World number 1 Iga Swiatek, normally one of the most diplomatic voices on tour, admitted in a press conference that she sometimes feels like she's being watched even in supposedly private areas, and that it creates a constant low-level anxiety that never fully goes away. Other top players, including Jessica Pegula, Ons Jabeur, and even some of the men like Novak Djokovic and Daniil Medvedev, echoed similar concerns. Djokovic, never one to shy away from controversy, pointedly noted that if players wanted to be on reality television, they would have signed up for that instead of professional tennis. The Australian Open found itself in full damage control mode. Tournament director Craig Tiley, who has overseen the event's transformation into the most technologically advanced of the 4 Grand Slams, was forced to address the controversy in multiple press conferences. His responses were a masterclass in corporate speak, acknowledging player concerns while defending the tournament's practices and stopping just short of apologizing. He emphasized that all camera placements are disclosed to players in advance, that the footage is used to enhance the fan experience, and that the tournament takes player privacy very seriously. But his words rang hollow in the face of what everyone had witnessed. You can't claim to value privacy while simultaneously broadcasting a player's private breakdown to the world. The WTA, caught between their broadcast partners who pay billions for access and their players who are demanding boundaries, issued a carefully worded statement about the importance of player well-being. They promised to review policies around camera placement and usage in consultation with the Player Council, but stopped short of implementing any immediate changes. Translation: they heard the complaints, but they're not willing to sacrifice the revenue that comes from this kind of intimate access unless the players force their hand. And that's where we are right now. The 2026 Australian Open has become a flashpoint in a larger conversation about the relationship between athletes and media, between privacy and access, between entertainment and exploitation. Thanks to Serena Williams and her willingness to use her platform to defend a young player who reminded her of herself at that age, the tennis world is being forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we consume sports and what we're willing to put athletes through for our entertainment. But let's bring this back to Coco Gauff, because in all the controversy and debate, we can't lose sight of the actual human being at the center of this storm. This is a 21-year-old woman who has been in the spotlight since she was 15, who has handled fame and pressure with remarkable grace and maturity, and who has become one of the faces of American tennis through her talent and personality. The quarterfinal loss to Svitolina stings, there's no question about that. Coco had entered the tournament as one of the favorites. Her game was in great shape, and she had legitimate championship aspirations. To fall short in such a one-sided manner is going to fuel her motivation for months to come. But here's the thing about Coco Gauff: she's a fighter. She's shown throughout her young career an ability to bounce back from setbacks that would crush lesser players. Remember when she lost in the first round of Wimbledon in 2023? She came back and won the US Open 2 months later. Remember when people questioned whether she could compete with the top players? She's now firmly established in the world's top 5 with multiple titles to her name. This Australian Open disaster, as painful as it is, will become fuel. It will become motivation. And when Coco finally breaks through and wins that second Grand Slam, you can bet she's going to remember this moment and everyone who doubted her. This is the conversation that Serena Williams has forced us to have. By defending Coco so publicly and so forcefully, she's made it impossible for the tennis establishment to brush this under the rug or dismiss it as one player having a bad day. The stakes are too high, the voice too important, the message too resonant with both players and fans. Change is coming to how tournaments handle player privacy and coverage. The only question is how quickly and how comprehensively. So where does all this leave us as we look toward the future of tennis? The 2026 Australian Open will be remembered as a turning point, the moment when the players, led by the courage of Coco Gauff speaking out and amplified by the authority of Serena Williams defending her, drew a line in the sand and said no more. The tournament showcased incredible tennis, with champions being crowned and records being broken, but its legacy will be defined by this controversy and how the sport responds to it. Will we see meaningful reforms in how tournaments treat player privacy? Will the governing bodies implement real protections instead of just issuing empty statements? Will the media and fans adjust their expectations and give athletes the space to be human? Only time will tell. What we know for certain is that Coco Gauff will be back, stronger and more determined than ever. Champions aren't defined by how they perform when everything is going right. They're defined by how they respond when everything falls apart. Coco has shown time and time again that she has the mental toughness and resilience to overcome adversity. This Australian Open nightmare will become another chapter in her story, the low point that makes the eventual triumph that much sweeter. And when she does win that next Grand Slam, and trust me, she will, the embrace between her and Serena Williams in the player box is going to be one for the ages. As for Serena, she's reminded everyone why she's not just the GOAT on the court, but also the most important figure in the history of women's tennis. Her willingness to speak truth to power, to defend the next generation, to use her platform for something bigger than herself. That's the legacy that will outlast all the Grand Slam titles and all the records. She's created a roadmap for how retired athletes can stay relevant and impactful, not through nostalgia or celebrity, but through meaningful advocacy for the sport and its players. The tennis world is at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of treating players as content machines, squeezing every possible moment of drama and emotion out of them for our entertainment, regardless of the human cost. Or we can step back, establish boundaries, and remember that these athletes are people first, with the same right to privacy and dignity that we would expect for ourselves. Thanks to Serena Williams and Coco Gauff, we're having this conversation right now, today, when there's still time to get it right. So here's the million-dollar question, tennis fans. Where do you stand on all of this?
First of all, I'm from Compton, California, and I remember playing on these courts and, my life was great. I never felt like I needed anything. For me, believe in you, no matter what. There's a lot of people that say you can't do this or you can't do that or you're not going to be good enough or you